Hey everyone, and welcome back to Retro Legends. Today we're going to talk about one of the most controversial and infamously loved for its failures games, Bubsy 3D, released in 1996 for the PlayStation. This game is known for being one of the most disappointing experiments in the world of 3D platformers. If you thought the first Bubsy game was a bit of a mess, wait till you hear what happened when it tried to go 3D. Get ready for a journey into the world of Bubsy 3D, where expectations were spectacularly dashed, and please, keep some barf bags handy. Let's begin. Before we dive into the details of Bubsy 3D, let's take a quick step back to understand who Bubsy is, and why his adventure in the 3D world had such a negative impact on his reputation. The character Bubsy was born in 1993, when Accolade, an American company known for publishing several games on PC and consoles, decided to enter the platformer market with its own mascot game, following the success of Super Mario and Sonic the Hedgehog. In those years, many developers were trying to create their own iconic character that could compete with the giants of the industry, and Bubsy was Accolade's answer to this trend. The first game in the series, Bubsy and Claw's Encounters of the Furred Kind, came out for Super Nintendo and Sega Genesis and surprisingly was met with pretty positive reviews. Despite not being perfect, the game managed to offer an interesting challenge, colorful graphics, and a charismatic protagonist, an anthropomorphic cat who never missed a chance to make jokes and witty comments during gameplay. Bubsy, in fact, was known for his loud attitude and for his cocky personality, a distinctive trait that set him apart from other platformers of the time. The success of the first game pushed Accolade to quickly develop a sequel, Bubsy 2, released in 1994. However, while the first game had earned some praise, the second one started to show the first signs of decline. Bubsy 2 didn't introduce any big innovations, and the gameplay felt more chaotic and less polished than its predecessor. The reviews were less enthusiastic, and from that moment it began to feel like Bubsy was losing ground compared to other platform game stars. But the real nail in the coffin came in 1995 with the failed experiment of Bubsy in Fractured Furry Tales, a title developed exclusively for the Atari Jaguar. The console itself had problems with sales and developer support, and in this case, Bubsy ended up in a bland game, with uninspired level design and frustrating mechanics. This episode further damaged the franchise's reputation and caused the series to lose what little momentum it had left. In the mid-90s, with the arrival of 3D graphics, the entire platforming genre was going through a revolution. Titles like Super Mario 64, Crash Bandicoot, and Tomb Raider were changing the way games were designed and played. In this context, Accolade decided to try and revive Bubsy with a new 3D chapter, hoping to breathe new life into the character in the series. So, in 1996, Bubsy 3D was announced. According to the developers, the game was supposed to represent the future of platforming, taking advantage of the brand new PlayStation to offer a completely new experience. The goal was ambitious: to make Bubsy a top name in the new era of 3D, alongside the generation's biggest hits, but things went very, very differently. Bubsy 3D was developed by Redwood Games under the supervision of Accolade, and from the very beginning, it was meant to be the franchise's big leap into the world of 3D graphics. With the arrival of the PlayStation on the market in 1994, the video game industry was going through a huge change. 2D platformers, which had been super popular until then, were starting to lose their appeal, while switching to 3D seemed like the only way to stay in the game. In this setting, many companies found themselves facing technical and creative challenges they'd never seen before. Making a game in 3 dimensions meant completely rethinking game design, character controls, camera management, and even how players explored the levels. Some studios like Nintendo with Super Mario 64 were able to adapt quickly, while others struggled to understand the new rules of 3D game design. The Bubsy 3D development team, sadly, fell into the second group. The team didn't have any experience with 3D graphics, and this really showed in the final product. The developers tried to use the PlayStation hardware, but they didn't really understand how to make a good 3D platformer. One of the biggest problems was the graphics engine. It looked really basic compared to other games at the time. The environments were made of simple, blocky shapes, with almost no textures and dull, ugly colors. There was practically no art direction, and the game world looked like a bunch of messy, square shapes with no real style. But one of the worst flaws was the camera control. In 3D, managing the view was a crucial challenge, and many developers were experimenting with new solutions to offer players a smooth experience. Super Mario 64 had introduced a semi-free and intuitive camera system, while Crash Bandicoot opted for a more linear level design so as to minimize orientation problems. Bubsy 3D, however, completely failed in this aspect. The camera was stiff, poorly positioned, and often caused confusion, making it difficult to understand where to go or how to handle the jumps. The gameplay itself was clunky and frustrating. Bubsy moved with stiff and unnatural animations, and his jumping, which should be precise and responsive in a platformer, was slow, imprecise, and hard to control. Every movement felt heavy and unintuitive, turning even the simplest actions into a difficult and frustrating task for the player. Another problem was the game's rhythm, which felt broken and unengaging. The levels were too big and empty, without a clear direction or well-defined goals. While other 3D platformers offered progressive challenges and well-designed levels, Bubsy 3D felt like a bunch of random platforms, without a real game flow. This made the experience boring and repetitive, without that drive that would make the player want to continue. Even though the PlayStation hardware was capable of so much more, the end result seemed more like a botched experiment than a title that was supposed to mark a new era for Bubsy. The game was surpassed in every aspect by other titles of the time, and ended up being remembered as one of the worst 3D platformers ever. Bubsy 3D was created with the goal of being a cutting-edge 3D platformer, similar to games like Super Mario 64 and Crash Bandicoot, but with a main character that players already knew. The idea was to use the transition to 3D to breathe new life into Bubsy, making him into a modern platforming icon. However, the end result was far from what anyone expected, leading to a game that felt outdated from the moment it came out. One of the main problems was the movement system. In a 3D platformer, the controls need to be precise and responsive, so the player always feels in complete control of the character. Bubsy 3D, however, offered a stiff and imprecise movement experience, with a jumping system that felt more like a tightrope walk than a fun game mechanic. Bubsy had limited mobility, and every attempt to move smoothly was hampered by unintuitive level design. The platforming sections, which should have been the heart of the game, became a frustrating experience, with imprecise landings and a constant sense of losing control. But the biggest problem was the camera, which turned out to be one of the worst aspects of the game. Even back in the 90s, developers knew that camera control was one of the most complex challenges for 3D, and titles like Super Mario 64 actively tried to offer innovative solutions to make the experience as smooth as possible. In Bubsy 3D, however, the camera seemed to have a mind of its own. It positioned itself at strange angles, often cutting off the view at crucial moments, and forced players to fight more against the camera system than against the enemies themselves. At times, Bubsy felt more like a failed virtual reality experiment than a platformer protagonist, with the camera moving unpredictably and causing a constant feeling of disorientation. This awful camera control made the already complicated level design even more frustrating. The game worlds were big, but empty and lacking detail, giving the feeling that the areas were incomplete or poorly designed. The platforms were often badly placed with jumps that seemed impossible to correctly calculate because of the shaky camera. Many levels seemed designed without a clear idea of how the player should tackle them, leaving a sense of emptiness and repetition. Besides the technical problems, the game's atmosphere also contributed to making it unpleasant to play. The soundtrack was repetitive and often annoying, with sound effects that irritated more than accompanied the action. But perhaps the most exasperating aspect was Bubsy himself. In an attempt to make him a charismatic and funny character, the developers gave him an endless series of sarcastic jokes and out-of-place comments that were endlessly repeated. The result? A protagonist who not only wasn't funny, but got on your nerves after just a few minutes of playing. All these elements combined made Bubsy 3D a terribly frustrating experience, and far from the masterpiece Accolade hoped to bring to market. Instead of marking the beginning of a new era for Bubsy, The game ended up turning him into a laughingstock, almost permanently sinking the series and becoming one of the worst 3D platformers ever. When Bubsy 3D came out in 1996, the critics were not kind. The reviews were almost all negative. Lots of reviewers said it was one of the worst games ever on PlayStation. GamePro talked about the boring gameplay, the bad graphics, and the camera that was hard to control. Other magazines said the game felt more like an unfinished prototype than a real game you could buy. Compared to other 3D platformers at the time, it looked really bad. In 1996, the same year Bubsy 3D came out, we saw awesome games like Super Mario 64 and Crash Bandicoot. These two games changed platforming forever, and showed how to do 3D the right way. Bubsy 3D, on the other hand, looked old, even when it was brand new. It looked more like a bad PC game from the early 90s than a game made for the new consoles. The fans of the franchise were also deeply disappointed. Although the previous Bubsy games weren't perfect, at least they offered a colorful and fun experience in the world of 2D platformers. Bubsy 3D, however, betrayed everything that made the character even slightly likable, turning him into an annoying caricature, placed in a world that seemed alien and incomplete. Despite the commercial and critical disaster, Accolade didn't give up immediately. The company tried to keep the brand alive, trying to bring Bubsy back in other contexts, but the damage was done. The character had become a symbol of mediocrity, an icon of how not to handle the transition from 2D to 3D. The video game industry was rapidly advancing, and Bubsy, with his failed debut in 3 dimensions, was swept away by the competition. Over the years, Bubsy 3D became a case study among retro gaming fans. It's often mentioned in discussions about the worst video games of all time. The game was included in many lists of the most unplayable video games, getting criticism for its frustrating gameplay, rough design, and technical incompetence. However, as happens with many works so disastrous they become iconic, Bubsy 3D found a second life in the world of cult gaming. The game is often mentioned in videos by YouTubers specializing in bad games, and it has become a meme within the retro gaming community. Its legendary badness has made it a piece of history, a perfect example of how ambition, without the right skills, can lead to disastrous results. Today, Bubsy is nothing more than a bizarre memory of the era of experimental 3D platformers. Its legacy is that of a game too bad to be forgotten, an unintentional icon of the video game industry's fallibility, and a perfect example of how, in the world of video games, jumping on the bandwagon of the latest trend isn't enough to be successful. Now, it might surprise you, but despite all the bad reviews, Bubsy 3D has gained a strange and unexpected group of fans over time. The game is often called so bad it's good, meaning it's so strange and poorly made that it's almost funny. Some retro gaming fans, drawn in by its bad reputation, see it as a collector's item, a piece of history from a time when game developers were trying to figure out 3D without having the right skills. Some people even defend it, saying that, despite its obvious problems, the game has historical value. It shows one of the many wrong turns the video game industry took when switching from 2D to 3D. Some compare it to a B-movie, a movie that's so bad it's good. The confusing design, the simple graphics, and the crazy camera make it so frustrating that it's strangely memorable. But that's not all. Over the years, the online community has started to re-evaluate the game ironically, making memes, video parodies, and even speedruns. Some players challenge themselves to complete it as quickly as possible, turning it into a kind of endurance test. The game has also appeared on numerous lists of the worst titles ever made, and this negative notoriety has helped keep its name alive among retro game enthusiasts. Another interesting aspect is the mystery surrounding its troubled development. Unlike the first installments of the series, Bubsy 3D wasn't developed directly by Accolade, but by an outside team, Redwood Games. This decision generated a lot of speculation about the management and direction of the project. According to several sources, the developers didn't have experience with 3D, and their approach to design was based on outdated technology and game design philosophies. Some former team members revealed in later interviews that they didn't have access to an official PlayStation development kit in the early stages of production. This means that many design choices were made blindly, without a real understanding of the console's capabilities. Additionally, it seems that the team took inspiration from early 3D game prototypes like Jumping Flash for PlayStation, but without managing to replicate its fluidity or well-designed levels. All of this information fuels the myth behind Bubsy 3D, transforming it into something more than a simple video game failure. It has become a kind of case study, an example of how rushing into the 3D market without the right skills could lead to disastrous results. Ironically today, Bubsy is more famous for his legendary failure than for his glory days in the early 90s. In conclusion, Bubsy 3D is a perfect example of how jumping into 3D can go wrong, especially when the development team lacks experience and doesn't have a clear vision. Although it left a negative mark on the gaming world, Bubsy 3D has gained a sort of twisted charm over time, becoming a symbol of a memorable flop. Today we remember it as a game that failed in almost every way, but it remains a key part of video game history. And that concludes our trip down memory lane. How many of these fun facts did you already know? Let us know in the comments. Don't forget to like, subscribe to the channel, and ring the notification bell for more trips into the world of retro gaming. Thanks for watching Retro Legends, and we'll see you in the next video. Stay retro, stay legends.